So thanks, Luce. So our definition of strategy follows from that, which is it's about changing our fit with the environment to our advantage by concentrating power in time. So there's 3 dimensions to that: fit, time, and power. Conventional strategy really only talks about one of them, which is the power dimension. So time and fit. I mean, people talk about strategic fit, but it's never really explained what it is. What we're talking about in this is exactly what Lucy's talked about. So in the critical relationships with particular actors, the important ones, where is that taking us? And to work that through, we break those 3 dimensions down into a number of elements. So 3 of fit, 1 of time, 2 of power. And I'm just going to run through a case of how that works out in practice, just to give you a feel of it. If you can go on mute, that'd be great. Whoever's, yeah, thank you. So the example I'm going to give is
tomorrow. I thought it was Wednesday earlier. What do you do?
Could you go on mute, please?
Oh yeah. Well, 2 days left.
Christopher, any chance you can go mute?
Right. Anything you want me to look at? No, I think so. You're on the half full call. Yeah. I will show them where we're up to. Where are we at?
Hang on.
The host usually can
Patrick,
mute.
you should be able to mute as the host.
Yeah, I can't do it from inside though.
Okay.
Creation stuff is done. That's the thing that was missing. Okay. Yeah. The asset stuff is now working. I'm just now lining it up, and then I'll be.
Wait, magic. Always interesting, isn't it? Okay, so the example I'm going to give is one we often use, which is the Honda Yamaha motorbike war of 1981 to 1983, and I'm going to do this as a reasonable example of the case, if you like. So Honda and Yamaha, both big motorbike manufacturers, and my screen is frozen. There we go. Perfectly reasonably balanced in terms of power, so roughly the same amount of resource in the strategic relationship. Perfectly matched in terms of their concentration of power, so each had roughly 60 bikes in the market, and they were matched bike for bike, niche for niche, segment for segment. Both were co-evolving, so neither was particularly driving change in the other. That was a very reciprocal relationship. All the change in the nature of the fit between them was incremental, so they weren't doing anything particularly disruptive or radical. It was minor improvements on an accepted theme. So all the big disruptive stuff they'd done a generation before in terms of innovation. Perfectly synchronized, so the whole sector ran like clockwork. Once a year, a bunch, there were the annual bike shows, and each would bring out roughly 10 new models and retire 10 new models. So it was very, very, very regular. And at the time, Honda was seen as the leading edge. Yamaha was seen as part of the herd, along with Suzuki and Kawasaki. Honda were only at the leading edge for historical reasons, so there were no differentials between Honda and Yamaha or Honda and Suzuki that kept Honda at the leading edge. It was just that they got there first and nobody had gone past. Now, at the time, Honda were, and both of these are part of big industrial groups. Honda Group were investing massively in cars, so the war chest that had been sitting behind Honda motorbikes was taken away to invest in car factories. Yamaha saw this as an opportunity to take control of the bike market, and the Yamaha plan went like this. Critical mass. They built the world's biggest motorbike factory. They calculated that that would move them from a balanced position in terms of power to being stronger, force Honda back into being weaker. And through economies of scale, that would allow them to shape the market and push Honda back into reacting. And that would move Yamaha to the leading edge and push Honda back into the herd. And for Yamaha, that would have been a win. Didn't quite work like that. So the Honda riposte starts with foresight. You can't build the world's biggest motorbike factory without anybody noticing. So they knew what Yamaha were doing and knew exactly what it meant strategically. So while Yamaha were doing that, so they waited while Yamaha had committed all their resources and management attention on this new factory. In the meantime, Honda massively reduced the cycle time it would take them to design, develop, and bring to market new bikes, and restructured into many product development units that could design, develop, and bring to market new bikes. That meant that they were now able to change faster than Yamaha, which meant that obviously Yamaha's slower. And then they moved from multiple to diffuse. So they went from having 60 bikes in the marketplace, and they introduced 113 new models over an 18-month period. So they basically took every single market niche that Yamaha had a bike for and split it in half. So they literally fragmented the structure shattered the structure of the market. They did that by changing the paradigm. So they went from an incremental rate of innovation to paradigm. So they went for a styling paradigm. So they shifted the basis on which bikers bought bikes from purely on power bands, 750cc, to Honda have built a bike for somebody just like me. They did that deliberately to confound Yamaha, and they did that so that the result of that was that they started to shape and Yamaha had to react. So at the same time as they're trying to bring on stream this factory designed to build a small number of models in huge volume, they now have to start innovating and designing new models, which they brought out 37, but it doesn't compare to the 113 that Honda brought out. And after 2 years, they were left with a year's worth of unsold and unsaleable stock, and formally surrendered to Honda and said, sorry, we'll never do it again. Now you can see from an emergent strategy point of view, this was none of this was deliberate. So this is something that Honda were doing off stage that created the situation that pulled Yamaha into an attack and forced Honda into a riposte. All of this really is kind of accidental. It all was emergent. So the first thing in this really is understand the power of emergence, because mostly what happens, these are the statistics that Lucy said, mostly what happens is emergent strategy. It's not what you intended. The second way in which this approach helps in healing the sort of the breach between formulation and execution is that it's way, way faster to both formulate and execute strategy using this approach. It gives you a very much faster decision action cycle. That in itself gives competitive advantage. And critically, from our point of view, it reduces the time for the strategy to take effect. So the chances that you are going to execute the strategy before the world changes, or at a faster rate than the world is changing, increases massively. It increases the chances of you being able to shape the environment rather than just being on the receiving end of it, which is what happens most of the time for most of us. And because it's quick to do, it means planning multiple scenarios and strategies is much, much easier to do and very much more affordable. And it means you can switch strategies more easily because you can formulate it more quickly. And as you've seen with the Honda Yamaha example, that whole strategic war was fought out over a 2-year period. So if you think about strategy in terms of 5-year planning, forget it. The game's over and gone before that. And this is not that uncommon. The third thing really is around building strategies, a series of maneuvers. So it means that you can be much more specific. You've got information that's about specific maneuvers on capabilities. So what capabilities we need to change to execute this maneuver to make us more agile. What do we need to do? We need to restructure we need 10 times as many development teams to do 10 times as many product innovations. Output metrics, you can be very, very precise about each of these maneuvers, what the metrics are for knowing whether it's worked or not. And also outcome metrics, the things that happen to the other side of the relationship. So metrics on execution and effect are very, very easy to pull off from this. And that makes it easier to know whether the thing is actually working. Much shorter feedback cycle, because you can look at a maneuver by maneuver and say, yes, the strategy is working, or it's not. If it's working, carry on. If it's not working, let's reconfigure it and do something different. And by doing it like this, it makes communicating it way, way easier than it would do with a traditional approach to strategy, where you're trying to explain something that's going to take years to unfold. So what we're arguing really is that this provides a better interface between strategy development and execution. So the three ways in which it kind of helps really are the big one, understanding emergent strategy. Most of the time, 90% of the time, what happens is the emergent strategy. It's not the planning that works. So unless we understand how, if our strategy isn't built on where the forces in the environment are trying to take us, if we don't understand that, our deliberate strategy will fail most of the time. Much, much faster strategic cadence, and building strategies, a series of maneuvers, reduces that uncertainty around how we're going to execute.